The hallway camera flickers at 2:17 a.m. just for a fraction of a second. Most people would never notice it. A digital blink, a hiccup in time. But that flicker is the last moment anyone can say for certain that she was alive. A young woman, checked into a hotel under her real name, carrying a phone that never rang again, stepping into a corridor that did not belong to her when she tried to leave it. By sunrise, the bed would be untouched, her suitcase unopened, and the building, quiet, ordinary, forgettable, would begin swallowing answers the way old ground swallows bones. And hotels are meant to be temporary places. You arrive with a story, you leave with memories, but sometimes they become archives of something far darker. Places where people pass through and vanish so cleanly it feels intentional, as if the walls themselves know how to erase a human life. This is one of those stories. Not because it's loud, not because it's violent in the way movies prepare us for, but because it is quiet, procedural, and chillingly normal. And she checked in just before dusk. Front desk footage shows her smiling, tired, polite. The kind of face no one commits to memory. She had plans the next morning. Text messages sent hours earlier talked about breakfast, a drive, a future that assumed the night was harmless. The hotel was near the interstate, one of those places travelers don't remember the name of. Beige carpet, soft lighting, cameras mounted in corners like unblinking eyes that see everything and explain nothing. And by midnight, guests reported nothing unusual. No screams, no struggle, no alarms. And that's the most disturbing part. Whatever happened to her did not announce itself. It slipped between moments. Between elevator dings and closing doors, between frames of footage that investigators would later rewind again and again, hoping reality would change if they watched closely enough. And because when police finally focused on the cameras, they realized something was wrong. Not with the image quality, not with the timestamps, but with the story the footage refused to tell. She entered the hallway, she never exited, and the camera silently captured something it was never meant to reveal. And the first assumption was simple. People don't vanish inside buildings without leaving something behind. A noise, a witness, a credit card swipe, but the hotel records showed nothing after 2:15 a.m. No elevator use tied to her key, no exterior doors opening, no front desk activity. It was as if she had been edited out of the night. And investigators began where everyone does now, with footage. Hours of it, grainy, color-drained clips that turned time into something elastic and cruel. They watched her walk down the hallway once, just once. She pauses near the ice machine, checks her phone, then continues past the camera's edge. That's where the certainty ends. There is no second angle, no overlapping coverage, a blind corridor, justified years earlier as low traffic, a budget decision that would later feel like a deliberate omission. And at first, they believed she returned to her room, maybe slept, maybe left later through a stairwell. But her room told a different story. The bed was untouched, bathroom dry, no signs of panic. Her purse sat on the desk, wallet inside, cash untouched. Her phone charger still coiled, unused. Whatever happened, it happened quickly. And it happened without her preparing to go anywhere. And then came the anomaly, a moment in the footage that no one noticed until weeks later. At 20:19 a.m., the same hallway camera flickers again. 2 seconds of distortion. When the image stabilizes, something is different. The light at the far end appears dimmer, the shadows longer, and for a brief, almost insulting moment, there is movement where there shouldn't be any, and a shape passes across the far wall. Not a person walking through frame, not a reflection, a shadow moving against the direction of the light. Investigators slowed it down, frame by frame. What they saw didn't clarify anything. It deepened the unease. The shadow widens, then narrows, like something being pulled. And hotels are designed to absorb noise. Thick walls, carpeted floors, white noise humming through vents. A place where sound dies before it reaches help. And suddenly, the idea that someone could disappear there no longer felt impossible. It felt engineered. And the question was no longer where she went. It was how many times something like this had already happened and been forgotten. And by the third day, the hotel stopped feeling like a crime scene and started feeling like a confession that wouldn't speak. Investigators walked the same corridors over and over, counting steps, testing doors, standing still in places where time seemed to hesitate. They measured distances between cameras and realized how easy it was to disappear between them. 7 seconds. That was all it took to move from one blind spot to another. 7 seconds where anything could happen and nothing would be recorded. And staff interviews revealed patterns no one wanted to acknowledge. Late night maintenance requests that were never logged. A security guard who sometimes worked double shifts, sometimes not at all. Housekeeping staff who avoided one particular service corridor because it felt wrong. These weren't facts that held up in court. They were impressions, and impressions are easy to dismiss until they start aligning. And the service corridor ran parallel to the guest hallway. No cameras, no windows. a narrow passage designed for carts and linen bins, leading to a freight elevator rarely used after midnight. On paper it was secure. In reality, the lock had been malfunctioning for months. Anyone with the right timing could slip inside without leaving a trace. And when police finally reviewed the freight elevator logs, they found a single anomaly. A brief power interruption at 2:21 a.m., not long enough to trigger an alarm, long enough to reset the system. After that, the log resumed as if nothing had happened. A clean break in the record. Another erased moment, and friends began speaking to the media. They talked about how cautious she was, how she always shared her location, how she didn't trust strangers easily. These details were meant to comfort, but they had the opposite effect. Because this wasn't recklessness, this was vulnerability intersecting with opportunity. And then there was the call. A guest on the same floor reported hearing something that night. Not a scream, not words, just a sound like furniture scraping followed by silence. At the time, they ignored it. Hotels are full of strange noises. People move on. That's what these places rely on. And by the end of the week, the hotel reopened. New guests checked in. Fresh sheets covered the bed she never slept in. The hallway camera kept recording. Life moved forward, as it always does. But somewhere in that building, between walls designed to forget, the truth was still trapped, waiting for someone brave enough to keep looking. And time did what it always does in cases like this. It didn't heal, it buried. Leads went cold, headlines faded, and the hotel's name slipped back into anonymity. But behind the scenes, the footage never stopped being watched. Analysts, consultants, private experts, people whose careers are built on noticing what others miss, kept returning to those same hours between 200 and 300 a.m. Because the cameras hadn't lied, they had simply told the truth in fragments. And someone noticed it months later. Not a shadow this time, but timing. At 2:18 a.m., one camera on a lower floor shows a man exiting a stairwell. He isn't a registered guest. No luggage, no room key used before or after. He pauses, looks directly up at the camera, then adjusts his jacket in a way that feels practiced. 30 seconds later, the feed cuts briefly to black. When it returns, he's gone, and the hotel claimed it was a glitch. But glitches don't usually line up with human behavior. And when investigators cross-referenced staff schedules, they realized something else. That stairwell access was supposed to be restricted after midnight. Only employees had clearance, only people who knew the building, and a former maintenance worker came forward anonymously. He talked about how certain cameras were known to lag during brief power fluctuations, how easy it was to trigger one if you knew which circuit fed which floor. He didn't accuse anyone directly. He didn't have to. His words filled in gaps the footage couldn't. And the most disturbing discovery came from the audio, not from the hallway camera, but from a fire safety recorder installed years earlier. It wasn't meant to capture conversations, just ambient sound spikes. At 29 a.m. there's a spike, low frequency, sustained, the kind associated with pressure against a surface, a door, a wall, a human body, and it lasts 9 seconds, and no screams, no voices, just resistance, and then nothing. And this is the moment the case stopped being about a missing person and started becoming something else entirely. Because someone hadn't just taken her. Someone had understood the building well enough to make it help them. And once you realize that, you start asking a far more terrifying question, and how many places like this exist? And by the time the public learned about the audio spike, the story had already shifted into something heavier, something harder to sit with. This wasn't a crime of impulse. It was choreography. Someone had moved through that hotel with the confidence of a person who knew exactly where memory would fail, where cameras would blink, where sound would dissolve into architecture, and her family kept a light on at night long after hope became painful. They replayed her last voicemail, not for clues, but for proof that she had existed beyond paperwork and footage. Her mother said something once that never made the news. She said, "It feels like she fell into a crack in the world," and maybe that was closer to the truth than anyone wanted to admit. And the case file grew thick with maybes. Maybe she was lured. Maybe she crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong second. Maybe the hotel wasn't the setting but the weapon. Investigators mapped similar disappearances along highways, places designed for people who don't stay long and aren't meant to be remembered. Patterns emerged, then dissolved like chalk in rain, and what haunted analysts most was the lack of chaos. Crimes usually leave fingerprints of panic, mistakes, noise, witnesses who almost saw something. This left none, which suggested practice, or worse, permission, a system that didn't just allow disappearance, but quietly assisted it. And years later, when true crime communities dissected the footage online, they noticed something no official report mentioned. At 20:17 a.m., just before she exits frame, she hesitates, barely a step, as if she sensed something behind her, as if instinct tried to speak, and was ignored because we're taught to doubt it. And if you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? And because that's the final cruelty of cases like this, they don't just ask what happened to her. They ask how safe any of us really are in places we're told are neutral, temporary, harmless. And once that question lodges itself in your mind, it never really leaves. And there is a moment in every unresolved case when silence becomes intentional, when institutions stop returning calls, when documents arrive redacted not for safety, but for convenience. This case reached that moment quietly. No announcement, no closure, just the slow withdrawal of effort, as if the truth had exceeded what anyone was willing to hold. And the hotel changed ownership 2 years later. New signage, renovated lobby, cameras upgraded, though no one could explain why certain angles were still missing. The service corridor remained off limits to guests, sealed behind a keypad that now worked perfectly. Progress, they called it. But progress never answers questions. It only makes them harder to ask. And a private investigator retraced her final hours using cell tower pings. Her phone stopped transmitting at 20:20 a.m., not powered off, not dead battery. Disconnected, as if it had been sealed somewhere signals couldn't escape. Underground, encased, or carried far enough, fast enough that the system simply lost her. And one detail resurfaced years later, buried in an old maintenance report. A complaint about the freight elevator drifting slightly below floor level when stopping, just enough to create a gap. Just enough for something, or someone, to be moved without being seen from the hallway. It was marked, non-critical, closed without follow-up, and people want monsters in stories like this. A face to fear, a name to curse. But the most disturbing truth is simpler. Monsters don't need fangs when they have familiarity. They don't need violence when they have access. And they don't need silence when the environment provides it for free. And her case is still technically open. A phrase that sounds hopeful until you realize it mostly means inactive. Somewhere, in a file drawer or a forgotten server, her name waits for a reason to matter again. And the building, still standing, still hosting families and travelers, continues doing what it was always designed to do, and let people come, and let people go. And never ask too many questions about the ones who don't. And there's a reason stories like this linger long after the files are closed. It's not because of what we know. It's because of what we're forced to imagine filling the gaps. The human mind is not built to accept clean disappearances. We look for struggle, for mistakes, for something messy enough to explain the loss. When none appear, the absence becomes its own kind of horror, and some nights, former guests still post reviews online. They mention the quiet, how the halls feel longer than they should, how sleep comes slowly, if at all. They don't know her name, they don't need to. Places remember things even when people don't. And sometimes, that memory leaks out as discomfort, as a feeling you can't explain but can't shake either. And her family still marks her birthday. They set a place at the table. Not because they expect her to walk back in, but because erasure is the final crime, and they refuse to participate in it. To remember is an act of defiance, against systems, against indifference, against buildings that keep their secrets better than they keep their guests. And this story isn't about one girl. It's about how easily normalcy can be weaponized. How the most ordinary environments, hotels, corridors, cameras meant to protect, can become accomplices when no one is watching closely enough. It's about how history doesn't always live in old houses or abandoned towns. Sometimes it hides in places we pass through without thinking, trusting that temporary means safe. And somewhere out there, someone knows exactly what happened that night. They remember the timing, the flicker, the silence. And they live their life counting on the fact that most people don't want to know how thin the line really is between presence and absence. And this was one of those stories that wasn't meant to survive. It stayed buried because it was efficient, quiet, almost perfect. And if that unsettles you, it should. And because the most terrifying truths in American history aren't the ones carved into monuments, and they're the ones still checking people in.